All right, welcome back to Please Read Your Book. My name's Carl, and it's been a while since I've made a video, so I thought I would do a tier ranking to try to get caught up rather than make lots of little videos. I also really like tier ranking videos myself, so it's kind of cool to do this kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's been like 2 months since I made a video, but I have read a lot. I've been reading a lot of horror. So what I'm going to do is kind of tier rank recent reads and then also going back a couple of months. So what I've got are 38 horror books and manga that I am going to tier rank. So let's get started. So our first contender is Junji Ito with Mimi's Tales of Terror. So, Junji Ito, in case you don't know, is a manga creator. He creates a lot of horror manga. He's one of my favorites. He's excellent, excellent, excellent. This is an anthology of shorter stories, but he's more well known, at least I think in the US, he's more well known for his book length stories, but he does do lots of serialized anthologies. This one, not his greatest. This one gets a B. So, a couple of good stories in here, but not the best. Okay, so next thing here is After the Animal Flesh Beings by Brian Evenson. Brian Evenson is a weird literary horror slash weird horror and even just literary fiction writer. This is a short novella set on a post-apocalyptic world or post-apocalyptic future Earth. It's not exactly clear. It's not exactly relevant. It's very ambiguous, and that's a big part of his writing and his storytelling is ambiguity. What we have here is an Earth without humans, but there are some sort of android or robotic cyborg kind of beings that have been left behind, and they are facing extinction because their maker isn't making anymore, if you will. So, and there's a little bit of tragedy in this story too. This one I really, really liked, but I didn't think it was Evanson's best, so I'm going to give it a B. All right, next one up is The Plastic Priest by Nicole Cushing, or Cushing. I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name. This is possibly one of the weirdest books I've read in a long time, which is saying a lot because I've read some weird stuff. Weird in the sense of H.P. Lovecraft kind of weird. And the H.P. Lovecraft, not necessarily like the Call of Cthulhu that we kind of typically think of, but more of his sort of like science fiction, weird, psychedelic, psychological horror. So what we have here is a priest, I think she's Episcopalian priest, if I remember correctly, married to a pagan man, openly practicing paganism. She doesn't really like him, but they're married because it's convenient for them. And she doesn't really want to be a priest. She doesn't seem to believe in God or anything like that. But she has a congregation and she's constantly struggling with trying to come to grips with that. And she wants to express all of this to her congregation. It's all a bit weird. That sounds very melodramatic, but it's done in a very like psychological horror kind of way. It's weird. I'm not sure I really understood this book, to be completely honest with you. I would have enjoyed it more if it had, if the story was allowed to just sort of tell itself through the characters and the events and the actions and the dialogue. But this book relies a lot on exposition to just explain what characters are thinking or what characters are doing or why they're doing it or the background and all this kind of stuff. So I would have liked it to be actually longer and just let the story play out a bit more. So Okay, next one is Undead Folk by, and I have to check the name on this one because, and you'll find out why, Undead Folk, I want to say Kristen Silva. Yeah, we're going to go with that. Um, this was D for DNF. I did not like this book at all. This is a short book. I think it was only 50 or 60 pages. I didn't get past page 10 because I couldn't figure out what kind of book was this, and sometimes I really like that, sometimes I just really don't, and in this case I really didn't. I felt like it was trying hard to be dystopian, post-apocalyptic, young adults, urban fantasy, horror, all that stuff happening all, and that was all within 10 pages. Yeah, I just didn't like it at all. So, okay, next one. Collection of short stories. No One Will Come Back for Us by Premee Mohmamed. This is, I was new to Premee Mohmamed. This is the first book of hers that I've read, although I've seen her name popping up quite a bit. I believe she's got quite a few books out. um, Collection of short stories, a lot of kind of cosmic horror, psychological horror. Um, there is kind of some body horror going on. The first story in the collection is the strongest, I think. It's a story of a undead girl who washes up, I think, on a riverbank in a city or a town that is slowly flooding or slowly sinking into some kind of river or lake or something. And a woman finds her and struggles with, what to do. Should she take care of her? She knows that she's not, she knows she's undead, but she's not like a zombie. She's not a threat or anything like that. But she doesn't belong with the living, and the woman who finds her struggles with how to deal with that. So, interesting story. Kind of a mixed bag collection. Written very well. The prose is very good. She's definitely of a more literary strain of horror writer that we're seeing a lot more of. So I think it was very good, but not fantastic. So again, another B. Okay, next one we've got Wounds and Other Stories from the Border of Hell, and I have to get, yeah, this is Nathan Ballingrud. I had to get that last name correct. Sorry. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I read this a while ago and then I reread it again just recently. I think I touched on this in a reading roundup video or something like that a while ago. But yeah, this is fantastic. This gets an A. Just great short stories, great horror short stories. And the thing that I really like about these stories is the sense of inevitability. I think that's what makes a great short story, is that the ending, even if it's still a surprise, it feels inevitable. It feels like it had to end that way. I don't like it when there's just like out of nowhere something happens and the story ends. It's something that's completely unrelated to all the characters and events. I think that that's just kind of poor writing. But he's really great, really great writer. Really like these short stories. The title story has been made into a film, which you can, at least I saw it on Netflix, at least in the part of the world I'm in, and that was really good too. And that's quite rare that those two things happen. So, excellent stuff. Next one, Stephen King, The Institute. Go on, BookTube, you can hate me. This was a D, this was a D and F, and more of an F than a D, actually. This was not a good book at all. I tried to read this twice. I think when it first came out, which was maybe a couple of years ago, and then again recently, I tried to reread it. You know, I, I like horror, so I guess I'm supposed to like Stephen King, but I kind of don't. I think Stephen King, I don't know. I read a lot of Stephen King when I was a teenager and even kind of preteen, like around 12. I was probably too young to be reading the kinds of things I was reading. And I just, as an adult, and I'm well into adulthood, I just can't get into Stephen King. I just, particularly this book. Okay, I'm not going to complain about Stephen King. I'll complain about this book. This book, really flat characters, very trite, very stereotypical characters, stereotypical settings of the sort of like idyllic southeast and then Midwest and the small town sheriff and knows everybody, this kind of thing. It's just like, just garbage. I don't think I got more than 100 pages into it. And it's like, I don't know, it's Stephen King, so it's like, an 800-page book or something like that. Which is, again, like, why does it take so many pages to tell this story? You know? So, all right, next one. I got to check this author's name. A Lush and Seething Hell by John Jacobs. Excellent collection of short stories. I'm going to give this one an A. If you are a horror reader, you have got to check this out. Very good. Similar to Wounds, very interesting stories, very interesting characters and settings. He's not afraid to go beyond the typical horror frameworks. He's also not afraid to take a horror archetype, like, an immortal character or, centuries old demon or something like that, and really spin it and make it contemporary and put it into a whole new kind of setting and context, which I really liked. And also, again, a kind of sense of inevitability in the stories, that the stories have to go a certain kind of way, that the ending, makes sense. So definitely something people should be reading. Next one, Children of Lovecraft. This is an anthology of stories within the Lovecraft mythos or the H.P. Lovecraft universe, or whatever. I was interested in this because it has people like Laird Barron, Brian Evenson, Gemma Files, but also there's a newer author that I don't know too much about, but I've recently learned some things about that I didn't like. Kiernan, something like that. This was hit or miss. I find a lot of these kinds of anthologies of different writers writing at different periods of time for different reasons and purposes. They're always kind of hit or miss, So I'm going to give it a C. I thought it was just kind of overall run of the mill. There are some good stories in there. I mean, Laird Barron is great. Brian Evenson is great. Gemma Files is great. There's some great writers in there. But overall, I didn't think it was great. So, next one, The Massacre at Yellow Hill. C.S. Humble. This was a total surprise for me. I don't know how I came across this. I think this was a random, this looks cool, download that now from Amazon kind of choice. Yeah, this was a very interesting book. And this is one of the things that I like a lot about horror. It's a horror story, but it also deals with race, race within a historical context, racism within a historical context, social issues, things like that. All that kind of wrapped up in a really compelling horror story. So, yeah, definitely, I really like this. I'm going to give this one an A because also the prose and storytelling in it is just very good too. So, okay, next one, Clive Barker, The Books of Blood, Volume 1. Superb, absolutely amazing. It's Clive Barker, and it's early Clive Barker short stories. In case you don't know, The Books of Blood, there's 3 volumes of it. Clive Barker short stories. I don't know off the top of my head the time period of these stories in relation to his other writing, but I want to say it's very early, probably around Damnation Game, Hellbound Heart. Excellent, excellent short stories. Yeah, I had read this one again when I was young, similar to Stephen King, but Clive Barker has always stuck with me as a writer that could be reread and that should continue to be read, not just something you kind of go through a phase of reading. I think Stephen King is, I'm not going to say that about Stephen King. So, Clive Barker. Yeah, these stories are just amazing. Clive Barker could write within any genre, I think. He chose horror, but I think he could write within any genre. He does write a bit of fantasy too, but it's still horror. And I say that because, yes, these are horror stories. Yes, these are scary stories with monsters and scary things that happen and people die and there's ghosts and things like that. But these are really tragedies. Every one of these stories is a tragedy. Every one of them is a tragedy. And that's what makes them work, and that's what makes them last, and that's what makes them stand the test of time. And that's what makes Clive Barker a great writer, is he really understood from go. It seems like from go, from his very earliest work, he understood what compelling, great stories were. I think his primary tool is tragedy. I think the primary thing that he works with is tragedy. So, just fantastic stuff. Um, it had been a long time since I'd read these, almost 30 years. I'm old. Um, and yeah, I just really enjoyed them all over again. It's just amazing. Just just amazing stuff. Really liked it. So, okay, moving on. This isn't a Clive Barker video. We've got Fugue State, which is short stories from Brian Evenson. This excellent Evenson. This one gets an A, because this is not just horror stories. Similar to Clive Barker, I think Brian Evenson could write in any genre, but he's chosen horror. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this book. There is a bit of folk horror, there's body horror, there's even just like weird stories where you're just not sure what's going on, almost kind of Alice in Wonderland like, in the sense that there's a character is in or has a very strange perception of reality, or is in a very weird reality, and somehow things are happening there. So excellent stuff. Very, very good. Next one, Kathe Koja, Skin. This is Kathe Koja's third novel. First one is Cipher, second one Bad Brains, third one is Skin. This was very good. I really, really like this. Let me go ahead and give it an A before I ramble. So Skin, as the title suggests, is about body horror, but it's also about relationships. It's also about obsession. It's also about the pursuit of dreams, particularly art. Um, it's an interesting book, and I think this is, I'm not sure, I'd have to do a little more reading. I think this is where Kathe Koja's writing departs from where her first two books were. Her first two books were definitely horror novels, whereas here she is going a little bit broader and also writing about a relationship. And I think going forward from here, when you read her books, there's less horror, and I think she may have even not, there may have been a period of time, I'm not sure, where she doesn't even write any more horror, and she's just writing basically literary fiction. So this is a great book. Her writing in this book is really powerful. It was very powerful in the Cipher. It takes a bit of a strange, not a strange, it changes a bit for Bad Brains, because it has to, because of the nature of that book. And here, again, it changes because of the nature of the story. And I think that's one of the things that makes her such a powerful writer, is that she's able to adapt her writing style, her narrative, and her prose to fit the book that she's writing. It's a very interesting thing to do as a writer. It's a bit risky to do as a writer too. So definitely worth checking out. Okay, moving on. This thing between us, Gus Moreno. Have I got that correct? I think I got that correct. Okay, this was a C. I did not think very highly of this book. I thought this was just a very average contemporary horror novel. Didn't really stand out to me. It's not terrible. It's not poorly written. It's well written. It has some interesting literary devices in it. The way that he chooses to tell the story. Um, but I just didn't find it to be very compelling. So there you go. A Child Alone with Strangers, Philip Fracassi. Very interesting book, very interesting writer. I think this is the third book of his that I've read this year. Um, the title alone is provocative, Child Alone with Strangers. So in this book, we've got a child who's been kidnapped and is sequestered in a kind of shack or abandoned home in a wooded area, and there is a kind of entity in the woods and underneath the house where he's staying. And together they have a sort of like psychic bonding, and then things happen. So I'll leave it at that. Excellent book. Excellent book. I'm going to go ahead and give that an A. If you're reading horror, you've got to read this. You've got to read Philip Fracassi. He's a great writer. Okay. Okay, now Poppy Z. Brite, Wormwood. Holy crap. What a book. What a writer. Poppy Z. Brite, amazing. And this is a collection of short stories. I think this is actually better than her novels. Um, and I think that this is a book, and she is a writer. I'm sorry she has transitioned to he, but I'm going to use she because this was Poppy Z. Brite when it was written. This book in particular, I think, really deserves sort of a renaissance of attention among horror fans and on the booktube world or whatever. These are just great short stories, similar to Clive Barker. These aren't just scary stories with monsters and horrifying things that happen. These are tragedies. I think every single story in this book is a tragedy. I can't think of one that's not. I just finished rereading it. And again, I read this when I was about 20, so that's about 30 years ago. Um, she is just fantastic. And I love these stories too because they're primarily all set in the South, the Deep South, the New Orleans and New Orleans area. She does a great job of recreating that whole environment, those settings. Her characters are so interesting, even when you don't like them. So interesting. Yeah, and she just has this great sense, like Clive Barker, just this amazing sense of tragedy. And she's just able to take you on this sort of trajectory with the characters in their lives, you know, even if it's just a slice, maybe sometimes it's just 3 or 4 scenes of a person's life, but you know, it's just so powerful. There's one story in particular of a singer who um, has a very unique and very powerful voice and is also very emotionally moved by the lives of his fans and the tragic lives of some of his fans. And so he doesn't want to sing anymore, but he gets talked into, his band becomes very popular, gets talked into doing, I guess, kind of a sort of a comeback performance, if you will. And he seizes upon a moment in that performance to try to kill himself. But something worse happens, something more tragic than taking his own life happens. He basically removes his own vocal cords on accident. So, and it's not graphically described. It's described so well and so artistically and so poignantly and so elegantly, and yet so tragically. It's just amazing. Poppy Z. Brite, holy cow! I'm gonna have to like read more of her and do more videos on her. Just amazing. Okay, I gotta move on. Just it's so good. Okay, moving on. All the Fiends of Hell, Adam Nevill. Gonna give this one an A. This is the second book of his that I've read. I read The Ritual before. This is a weird, interesting book. It's quite action-packed, quite fast-paced. It starts a bit slow, but once it hits its stride, it's really good. It's a really interesting concept of kind of an alien insect, bacterial parasite kind of thing that wipes out most of humanity. There's a few survivors. The main character who's a survivor is not a prototypical kind of survivor type. So I think that's an interesting, it's definitely not groundbreaking device, but interesting. And I think Adam Nevill does a great job with it. It could have become very trite and stereotypical and boring, but he did a great job with it. So excellent. He's a great writer, and great title too, All the Fiends of Hell. Okay, another great title, In a Lonely Place, Karl Edward Wagner. Very good, very powerful short stories. Some weird cosmic horror that's happening here, a little bit of body horror, but a really powerful settings, and he's got this fantastic way of, how am I going to articulate this? Settings in horror are settings in all stories are important, but in horror, the setting itself can be horrific and can be the spark that causes the tragedy, or things like that, sets things off. A castle, a cave, something like that. He does a really great job of settings and kind of using the settings just as the stage point for the action to happen of the story. And a lot of it's very cerebral too. It's very good stuff. I think largely overlooked. Definitely an A read. This has been a great run of reading for me. So next one, The Black Farm. I have to look up his name here. I read this a while ago and I never talked about this book. I want to say, oh, come on, Carl. The Black Farm. Oh, I am terrible at BookTube. I want to say Stephen L. Peck. Why can't I find it here? Okay, I'm sorry. We're gonna have to move. Keep going here. I'm gonna give this one a C. It's extreme horror, which I don't like, but I did read this one. Concept is amazing. The concept is there's a couple who are down and out and running out of luck. They decide to kill themselves because they think their life is just terrible. They can't turn it around. And instead of going to heaven or purgatory or even hell, they go to the Black Farm, which is this place where you will be endlessly killed and tortured and slaughtered and all this kind of stuff. But they don't want that, so they fight back. So that's a cool concept, I think. And it's like hell is like an actual place. It's not just a state of mind or anything like that. And it's not the sort of Dante's, hell. It's a real place with different monsters and things like that. What I didn't like about it are two things. One is minor, one is major. The minor thing is it reads kind of like a video game where there's missions, and at the end of each mission there's a boss to fight. So, and it has this kind of pattern that goes through it, which it's not terrible. The thing I really didn't like about it is that Elias Withrow, sorry, that's the name, Elias Withrow, wrote The Black Farm. There is some sexual violence in it and some traumatized things that would traumatize anyone. Um, and the characters just sort of like brush it off and keep going. Ah, it just, I felt like, no, that's, and there's an attempt to graphically describe certain sex acts, which just like, why? It's not an erotic novel, and it's so hard to write about. Why would you do that in this novel? So, a good example of a book that could be a hell of a lot better with an editor. I think this is self-published, and had he gone through an editing process with a professional editor, not just like line editing, but also like kind of shaping the narrative a bit more and drawing out certain things and cutting other things. That's always very important, is what do you cut, what do you edit. It's sometimes more important than what's written. So anyways, I gave it a C. Satan Sleuth, holy cow, what a piece of absolute crap. I tried to read this about a year ago, I think, for Garb August, and it's been sitting on my Kindle, so I looked at it again. Again, couldn't get past the third or fourth page. Just absolute crap. I thought it would be a fun read, but just absolute crap. I don't get it. So, Negative Space, B.R. Yeager. That one I'm going to give a B. Kind of a, not kind of, definitely a weird book. Kind of teens doing a lot of drugs in a small town, and there's this tragedy, and it's not clear if there was some sort of occult thing that happened. Overall, an interesting read. I think it's worth checking out. Okay, next one. Gateways to Abomination. Matthew Bartlett. Wow. This one got an A. I'd never heard of this book before or this author. Absolutely loved it. It's a collection of short stories that are threaded together by not necessarily setting, mostly settings, but what threads them together is a radio broadcast from a remote sort of underground radio station somewhere in some wooded town somewhere. And this radio station is broadcasting like kind of strange occultish sermons and music and sounds and things like that. And when people hear this stuff, they go crazy, they lose their mind, they do weird things, and then it like gets weirder and weirder and weirder, where there's like possibly like a demon or Satan has been, brought forth into the world, and there's all sorts of strange things that are happening. It's all very weird, and the writing is really, really good. He's a really good writer. Often I find with like new horror, I think this is self-published. Often I find with like a lot of self-published horror is that a writer will have a great idea, great concept, but the text, the prose itself, the narrative itself is just not very good. Or they'll be a very good writer, but they don't quite know horror well enough, or they don't quite have the right frameworks and tropes to work with to pull off a horror story. He's got both. I definitely need to seek out more of his writing and find more. So definitely something worth checking out if you're a horror reader and you haven't tried this yet. Definitely need to. Moving along here, I think this is getting pretty long-winded. Experimental film, Gemma Files. I just recently read this. Great book, great novel, giving it an A. As the title suggests, there is a film with a questionable event on it, and a film professor tries to investigate and find out what happens or what had happened. And it's done really well. I like that device. I like that trope of the sort of academic or intellectual doing some sort of inquiry or investigation, paranormal investigation, that kind of thing. It's really good, and Gemma Files is a very good writer. Pacing of the novel is good. She understands how to hold readers and keep readers interested. Um, yeah, she's just really, really good. It's definitely worth checking out. So, next one is Uzumaki by Junji Ito. Second one from Junji Ito on this list, and I have to give it an S. This is just I think, one of the two best Junji Itos that I've read. The other one being Tomei. And this one is amazing. If you're not familiar with it, it's pretty well known, but if you're not familiar with it, there's a small town, small town in Japan that basically is cursed and haunted by spirals. And that's more horrific than it actually sounds. People start seeing these things everywhere. They start appearing on people's bodies and all over the place. And it turns into this sort of like definitely a cosmic horror kind of thing, psychological horror. What's great about it is the artwork, of course, it is manga. Also, I really like that there's just not, there'd be long stretches without much dialogue where it's just all very visual. It's fantastic. And it's worth noting that, I mean, his art style is very unique. It's very different. Excellent. Just great stuff. Next one. None of you shall. I can't read this because it's got a horrible cover. None of you shall be spared. Who is making these covers? They can't be read. Take some design classes and learn about contrast. Okay. Anyways, but this is Brian Evenson. Not as good as Fugue State. It's a collection of short stories. Going to give it a B. There are some very good stories in here, but I felt like there was some weaker stuff in here too. Definitely not at his prime on this one, although, you know, it's Brian Evenson, so it's still very, very good. Definitely above average. Another manga, another Junji Ito. This is Hellstar Ramina, or sometimes it's just called Ramina. This one, I'm going to give a B. Same level as Mimi's Tales of Terror. Starts out really cool. The concept is there's a moon or asteroid coming towards Earth, sort of kind of out of nowhere, comes into through a black hole, and it's named after the daughter of the scientist who discovers it. And it's going to crash into Earth. And of course, this sets off a panic. There's a cult that's started that wants to kill Ramina, thinking that will turn the asteroid back. She escapes. There's panic, like the whole society crumbles overnight, this whole kind of thing. I really liked it until about the last quarter, where it just becomes like this kind of like long chase scene as the Earth is breaking apart. And I felt like that part of the narrative was really weak and not quite the same for Junji Ito. But I think it's a great entry point to manga and to Junji Ito. It is a little more lighthearted. It's not as dark and ominous and just bleak. Like Uzumaki is just mind, like, whoa, that can mess with your mind. Next one, The Devil Takes You Home by, I want to say Gambino Iglesias. Have I got that correct? Sorry, there are just so many books here. I think I bit off more than I could chew. Yes, Iglesias. This one gets an A. This is a great book. A book that breaks genres, kind of defies genres. I know it's a bit of a cliche to say, but it's a crime story and a supernatural horror story put together in one. There's a husband who needs some money, so he agrees to kill someone. And then he finds out that, hey, I can do this and it's good money. So he does it again and again and again. And of course, when you start to do something like that, the devil won't be too far behind you, will he? So I'll leave it at that. You can find out what's there. But aside from the story, the writing in this is just excellent. He is just an excellent writer. Very compelling, very fast paced. Characters are well developed. Yeah, just a great book. I think this is a book that deserves a lot more attention than it's gotten. Come on, BookTube. I wish more people would take more chances on the kinds of books they read. So, next one, God's Demon by Wayne Barlow. This one I learned about from Bookpilled, who has a fantastic YouTube channel. If you're not following or watching his videos, you really need to be. Yeah, whoops, hello, not a C. Good Lord. This one gets an S. Fantastic. Bookpilled did a great review of it. I'm just going to touch on some points. It's more fantasy than horror, or at least of the horror that I kind of read. It's set in hell. Hell, in this book, hell is a place, a physical place that is inhabited, obviously, by the fallen angels and Lucifer. But things are changing in hell. And I'm not going to give away too much of the plot. What makes this book so great is just that it has a lot of world building, which is where I would link it to fantasy or put it under the fantasy umbrella. And it's done so well. It really transports you into these places and environments, and you find that the characters were just so well written. The characters are all demons, fallen angels, and things like that. And it's just really cool, really great stuff, but also horrifying at the same time, but horror in, I guess, in the literal sense, in that, the characters are evil. So, yeah. Next one, Rovers by Richard Lang. Similar to The Devil Takes You Home, and also an A. This Richard Lang is a literary fiction writer, but his fiction tends to be centered around crime and around criminals and kind of like the lowlifes of society. But in this story, or in this book, the two main characters are undead. They're basically vampires, and they're kind of just sort of surviving on the edges of small towns in the West that are sort of bordering onto the deserts and things like that. And someone catches on to them and starts tracking them and wants to kill them. And so they have to kind of figure out how to survive. But it's very good. Really, really good. I think that this is a good example, this book and also the book by Iglesias, The Devil Takes You Home, where literary writers can write horror stories or can use horrific elements or horrific characters in literary stories, and it works really well. And I think more literary writers should be doing that. Seems to be a lot of like literary science fiction now, and not much of it is very good because science fiction is just like a whole different thing. But you can write literary horror, and I wish more writers would do that. So, next one is Human Sacrifices, and I have to apologize, I got to look for the name. It's Maria, I want to say Ampere. I'm not pronouncing that correctly. This, excellent. Another A. I've had so many great reads lately. Human Sacrifices. Short stories, horror short stories, but definitely through the lens of feminism and through the lens of immigrant experiences and through the lens of, basically not to lump people together, but people who are vulnerable in society, but also having some sort of horrific event or happen to them. This was really good. I didn't know. I kind of went into it cold. I didn't know much about it when I read it. It was on sale on Amazon, so I just bought it. Yeah, this was very good. And it's translated from Spanish too, but the translation is good. The prose is very, very good, very eloquent. She's a great writer. Very unique stories. There's things like kidnapping, human trafficking, exploited workers. But again, horrific elements. There's also touches of vengeance and justice in it too, which I think are interesting. So definitely worth checking out. Human sacrifices. Next one, another Junji Ito. I don't know why I got so many Junji Itos in there. This one is Gyu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This one I did not like at all. And I love Junji Ito, but I do not love this book. Basically, this is a really juvenile kind of book, in my opinion. And maybe I don't understand the nuances of manga or Japanese culture or literature or things like that. So in this story, dead people are reanimated, and also dead fish are reanimated, given robotic legs somehow. And then the fuel that drives the robotic legs is their flatulent gas. So they're powered by farts. Okay. We're gonna leave that there. Next one, homunculus, and I have to look. This is Hideo Yamamoto. This was absolutely superb. So cool, so weird, so wonderful. Yeah. So this is a manga. It's a huge manga. This is volumes 1 and 2. I still have to read volumes 3 and 4 to find out how it ends. There's the main character is a Japanese businessman who chooses to quit his job and become homeless. He's living out of his car. One day his car is towed. He doesn't have enough money to pay the ticket. And someone overhears him. I think he's overheard saying like, oh, he needs to get some money. So this guy says, hey, I'll give you the money if you let me drill a hole, a tiny little hole, just a little hole in your head. And he says, okay, as one does. And from there, basically, his entire perception of reality is warped and warping. It just gets weirder and weirder. It's really good, really psychedelic. I guess technically it's horror. It's weird fiction, definitely weird. But it's really cool and it's worth checking out. I really love the artwork in it too. I thought that was really top shelf, so worth checking out. Okay, next one is A Short Stay in Hell. And I gotta check the title or the author here. Oh my gosh, Carl. This is what happens when you try to review 38 books at once. A Short Stay in Hell. I want to say it's... Okay, I don't have this correct. So, anyways, this one got a B. This is kind of an extreme horror, kind of an existentialist horror of a man's journey through hell, basically. I didn't think it was bad. I didn't think it was great. I thought it needed more, actually. And there were some parts of it, too, that were just really graphic that I thought didn't need to be graphic. And instead, I think that we could have just gotten more of the story, more meat to it. So, all right, next one is Black Easter, James Blish. This is another book-pilled recommendation. I'd never read any other James Blish before, so I really didn't know prose-wise what to expect, although I did watch a review on this. So basically, what happens in this book is just weird. It's like speculative occult horror, if that makes any sense. It doesn't make any sense. A black magician, like this evil wizard, not a Harry Potter kind of wizard, but like a Satanist, who has the ability to call demons forth from hell, is hired first to do like a kind of an assassination kind of thing. And then the real job is to unleash all the demons of hell onto Earth for one day as a sort of political maneuver, if you will, just to trigger other political events that would come about. So there's, you can see it's kind of an analogy to like if someone were to purposely set off nuclear warheads or some sort of massive I guess you could say something like a pandemic, if you wanted to get crazy and put on your tinfoil hat, that kind of thing. Um, I'm not going to give away too much of it, it, but it's just such a weird book. But it's really good. It's really, really good. Once you get sort of past that first hurdle, I guess, and you accept that this is speculative fiction, written, I think it was written in the late 60s or early 70s, at a time. So you have to accept a lot of things from that time. And you have to accept that there's a lot of things that, you know, wouldn't, that we would take for granted just don't exist back then. So cell phones and electronic monitoring and that kind of stuff. So anyways, a really good book, really weird. Black Easter. I think there's a companion book to it, The Day After Judgment or something like that. So I have to look for that. Oh, okay, trying to hurry up here. Richard Lehman, After Midnight, absolute piece of garbage. I think, again, this was a Garbagus thing that I had. It was sitting on my Kindle. Crap. I hear people like actually say Lehman is good, but man, this was just terrible. Not fun. Not good stuff at all. The Crow, graphic novel, James O'Barr. This came out. There's an anniversary edition. I read it when it first came out, and I remember I think I still have somewhere, maybe at my mom's house, original editions of this. I should look for those. Yeah, so I reread this. This is a graphic novel. It's kind of a revenge story. A guy seeking vengeance on a gang that killed his girlfriend. It's very like gothic. He's possibly undead. There's a movie that came from it as well. Didn't really hold up. I remember when I read it, I really liked it. And I think it's just because it was right place, right time. I was about 20, I think, when I read it, maybe even younger than that. I think I was younger than that. I think I was still in high school. Anyways, it's an artifact of its time, but I don't think it's an artifact that has stood the test of time. There's lots of references to post-punk and gothic music, like Joy Division, Susie and the Banshees, Bauhaus, The Cure, stuff. I was into that kind of stuff. But I just think it doesn't hold up. But if you're interested in that period of time and if you're interested in the gothic kind of stuff, it's worth looking at because it's definitely pretty raw from that era. Also, the artwork, I don't remember the artwork being that raw, but it's pretty raw artwork. So I'm going to give it a B for nostalgia. You definitely have to be a certain type of reader, I think, from a certain age to like it. Last one, Inconsolables by Michael Wehunt. This is excellent. Excellent horror short stories. Some of them are a little bit speculative. Weird, cosmic, body horror. Just really good stories. Great writer. Like some of these other writers I've mentioned, I think, he could be writing in any genre or literary fiction, but he's working within horror. Very well developed characters, very compelling. He knows what to write and what not to write, which I think is, the trademark of excellent horror. So there you go. 38 horror books and manga tier ranked for you. I hope you've enjoyed this. I apologize for some of the edits. my camera hasn't been cooperating, and I'm also in a hotel, so sometimes there's noise and that kind of stuff. But there you go. And once again, my name is Carl. This has been Please Read Your Book, and I hope to see you again soon.